1942. Bumpy's man called 5 hitmen to kill him. Bumpy smiled. Then he begged Bumpy for death. 5 hired guns waited for Bumpy Johnson to beg. Harlem expected blood. Instead, Bumpy smiled, stood still, and watched a powerful man realize too late that death now needed permission. The call didn't come with shouting. It never did. It slid through Harlem like a whisper with sharp edges, carried by men who didn't linger. 5 names followed it. 5 guns. Enough, they thought, to end a reputation. Bumpy Johnson heard it sitting still. No anger, no questions, just a pause long enough for the room to stay quiet. He knew the tone. This wasn't a challenge. It was an insult dressed as confidence. Someone believed numbers could replace understanding. The streets noticed before he moved. They always did. Shopkeepers lowered their voices. Corners held their breath. Harlem had learned the difference between noise and danger, and this felt deliberate, planned, clumsy in its certainty. The message kept traveling, changing hands, gathering arrogance. 5 men were already counting their courage. 5 men believed fear would arrive first, soften the target. They were wrong about that too. Bumpy stood, straightened his coat, and stepped into the day without escort or announcement. He didn't send warnings back. He didn't increase guards. He didn't rush. Power didn't hurry when it knew the ground belonged to it. What mattered wasn't the guns. It was who sent them. The disrespect sat heavier than the threat itself. In Harlem, killing a man was simple. Challenging his authority was not. Bumpy understood something they didn't. When violence is promised too loudly, it stops being inevitable. It becomes negotiable, and it's restraint. He walked past familiar faces, nodding to those he trusted, ignoring the ones who had been sent to end him. The men followed from the shadows, tension in their steps. Every glance at Bumpy carried hope and doubt in equal measure. They expected fear, and they found none. The corner where the confrontation was to take place had been a silent witness to decades of street politics, of alliances forged and broken. Bumpy paused there, just long enough to let the weight of the insult settle. The neighborhood felt it too. It wasn't just the threat of violence. It was the audacity of disrespect made visible. Invisible disrespect demanded a response measured not in haste, but in inevitability. A child ran past with a paper bag of bread, oblivious to the tension, and Bumpy's eyes followed him with a calmness that made the men behind him twitch. Their hands brushed weapons too often, tightening grips that trembled with anticipation. They wanted action, but action belonged to Bumpy. It always had. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't issue threats. He let the silence stretch like a shadow over the street. Friends, enemies, bystanders. Everyone felt the same pressure, a slow compression that left them breathless without firing a single shot. The insult had gone public, yes, but Bumpy had already converted that exposure into control. The 5 men, now fully aware that they were the ones under scrutiny, tried to reclaim composure. Their plan had assumed fear, chaos, and immediate compliance. Instead, they were trapped in a theater of power they hadn't been invited to understand. Each moment that Bumpy held still, each pause before he spoke or acted, chipped away at their confidence. By the time the first streetlight flickered to life, Harlem had learned something new about its king. Disrespect could be made public, and when it was, it could be answered not with blood immediately, but with a slow, inevitable force that no gun could outrun. Bumpy Johnson had turned the streets into an instrument of his authority, and the 5 men, once hunters, had become witnesses. Every eye that watched that night carried a lesson. Control, patience, and silence could bend even the boldest threats into submission. Violence was not the answer. Power, when wielded correctly, made violence optional. And in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson had just reminded everyone who commanded the world around them. They stepped into the light together, the 5 men in a line, guns heavy in their hands, hearts heavier in their chests. The one who had orchestrated it, the man who had believed himself untouchable, stood at the front, eyes sharp, teeth gritted. He expected chaos. He expected fear. What he got was calm. Bumpy Johnson didn't move forward. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise a hand. He simply smiled. A small, measured curl of lips that held no mockery, no amusement, only inevitability. It was the kind of smile that didn't need words, that cut deeper than any bullet. It was the smile of a man who knew the rules of his world better than anyone else. The man who had called for Bumpy's death felt it immediately. Pride left him first, then certainty. The confidence that had sent 5 men into Harlem dissolved in the slow recognition that the moment of decision no longer belonged to him. He had expected violence, but Bumpy's smile, steady, unflinching, made him see something far worse: the fragility of control in the face of mastery. The streets watched. Windows framed silent spectators. Neighbors froze in doorways. Every breath seemed to stretch. The 5 men shifted, unease replacing arrogance. Their guns weighed more, their hands shook. Bumpy's calm didn't need to explain itself. It demanded compliance. The one who had begged for dominance now realized he would have to beg for mercy. Bumpy took a step forward, slow, deliberate. Not threatening, not violent, just present. The man who had orchestrated death's promise faltered, knees weak, words caught in his throat. The neighborhood's code of respect pressed down like an invisible hand. There was no shouting, no bloodshed yet, but authority had been asserted. Completely, irreversibly. One by one, the other 4 shifted back, sensing the futility of what they carried. Guns lowered slightly, pride cracking, and still Bumpy smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just with the certainty that power owned the space around him. When the first whisper of surrender came from the man who had believed himself untouchable, Bumpy's eyes met his. A pause, then the inevitable. The man who had come to command now pleaded. Not for life, not for mercy in the streets, but for a release that only Bumpy could grant. The neighborhood exhaled. The night swallowed the tension. And in the silence, Bumpy Johnson demonstrated something no bullet ever could. Dominance through restraint, control through patience, power earned, never taken. The man who had sent 5 guns to end him now understood fully. The true authority was never loud, never rushed, and never afraid to let others beg for the thing they sought to impose. By morning, Harlem returned to its rhythm, the usual hum of life masking the night's tension. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks, children ran past corners, and streetlights flickered out one by one. Everything seemed ordinary, but nothing was the same. Bumpy Johnson walked silently through the blocks he had long protected. There was no celebration, no boastful declaration, no need to announce what everyone already knew. His presence alone reminded the neighborhood of the lesson. Respect could not be bought, and authority demanded acknowledgement. Violence had been promised, but it had been unnecessary. Restraint had spoken louder than any gun. The man who had come to kill him was gone from the streets. Not dead, not humiliated beyond survival, but fundamentally changed. He would carry the memory of that smile, of that quiet authority, wherever he went. Bumpy had shown that true power does not humiliate. It makes others confront their own limits. Harlem whispered of the night for weeks. Not the fear, not the guns, not the near miss, but the calm. The controlled presence that made the impossible feel inevitable. Children learned it in stories, men in hushed conversations, and even rivals in quiet acknowledgement. Bumpy's reputation was more than legend. It was a moral code. In a world hungry for chaos, Bumpy Johnson had offered order. In a world quick to strike, he had demonstrated patience. In a world obsessed with immediate triumph, he had shown that legacy is built on the ground of respect and restraint. And so, Harlem remembered, not the threat, not the violence, but the man who commanded the streets with nothing more than a smile, and who reminded everyone that power, when mastered, lasts far longer than fear.